A Canadian steps on your foot in a crowded subway. Before you can even react, they say sorry. Then you say sorry back for having a foot in the way. Neither of you meant anything by it. This tiny moment repeats itself fa. Around the world, this habit has become a joke. Talk show hosts joke about it. Tourists post videos of Canadians apologizing to doors, to chairs, to weather. Memes joke that a Canadian will say sorry to a mailbox they bumped into. It is one of the most repeated stereotypes about any nation on Earth. But here is the strange part. Canada was not built by people known for softness. It was shaped by fur traders crossing frozen rivers, loggers cutting through dense forests, and settlers surviving brutal winters. This was a hard, demanding land. So how did a country with such a tough history end up with a reputation for being the politest place on the planet? That is the mystery this documentary sets out to explore. Is the polite Canadian image simply a myth, exaggerated by movies and internet jokes? Or is there something real behind it, something rooted in history, geography, and the way Canadian society was formed? We will look at where this stereotype came from, and whether it holds up when you look closely at real Canadian life today. Because Canada is not one single culture. English-speaking Canadians, French-speaking Quebecers, and Indigenous communities all have different histories and different ways of relating to this idea of politeness. To understand why this word is spoken so frequently, we first have to realize that in Canada, sorry doesn't always mean what the rest of the world thinks it means. If you ask a Canadian why they say sorry so much, many will pause. They have never really thought about it. That is because sorry, in Canada, is not one word. It works more like a small toolkit, and Canadians reach for the right tool without even noticing. Sometimes it simply means, excuse me. A person squeezes past you in a grocery aisle and says sorry. No apology is intended. It is just a polite way to ask for space. Sometimes it means, what did you just say? Someone misshares a comment across a noisy table and says, sorry? With a slight rise in their voice. It sounds far softer than blurting out, what? A grandmother at a family dinner might say it 3 times in one conversation, simply because the room is loud. Sometimes it carries real empathy. If a friend's wedding day turns rainy, a Canadian might say, I'm so sorry about the weather. No one caused the rain. The word here is comfort, not guilt. Sometimes it softens disagreement, or even hides mild irritation. In a work meeting, someone might say, sorry, but I see it differently. On a crowded sidewalk, a cyclist might mutter, sorry, but this is a bike lane, clearly frustrated, but wrapping that frustration in a polite shell. And only sometimes, sorry means what it says in most other countries, an admission of fault. This is actually the least common use, even though outsiders often assume it is the only one. This linguistic flexibility didn't develop in a vacuum. The roots of this reflexive politeness stretch back centuries across the Atlantic, long before the nation of Canada even existed. Where does a habit like this actually come from? For Canada, the honest answer is more complicated than one tidy origin story. It is tempting to trace sorry back to a single source. But the truth is, no historian can point to one moment and say, this is where it began. What we can do is look at the different histories that shaped Canadian life and ask what they have in common. Canada's founding document did not promise life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness like its neighbor to the south. Instead, the British North America Act set out a different goal: peace, order, and good government. That phrase points towards stability and cooperation rather than individual assertion. French settlers in Quebec built farming communities where survival often depended on cooperation with neighbors. Long before European settlers arrived, many Indigenous nations practiced consensus-based decision-making, where agreement mattered more than command. Later, generations of immigrants arrived from around the world, often seeking safety and stability rather than conflict. These are 4 very different histories. They did not merge into one clear formula. Historians and linguists are careful not to draw a straight line from any single group directly to modern Canadian speech patterns. What they can say, with more confidence, is smaller and more specific. A Canadian linguistics study on the word sorry found that it often serves purposes beyond regret, such as getting someone's attention or easing an awkward moment. It did not identify one single cultural root. So instead of a single answer, we are left with a pattern. A country shaped by many groups who each, in their own way, learned to value calm over confrontation. But history only provides the blueprint. The physical reality of the land itself forced these distinct groups to adopt a very specific way of coexisting. Picture a country so large that a single time zone difference can separate neighbors by thousands of kilometers. Does living in a place like this shape how people talk to one another? Canada is the second largest country in the world by land area, yet most of its population is spread thinly across a narrow band near the US border. This creates very different, everyday realities. In small towns and rural areas, especially in places with harsh winters, neighbors often rely on each other. If a truck gets stuck in snow, someone stops to help. This kind of cooperation is common, though it is not unique to Canada. Many rural communities around the world share similar habits shaped by isolation and climate. In large cities like Toronto or Vancouver, daily life looks completely different. These cities are among the most multicultural in the world, filled with people from dozens of different backgrounds, languages, and customs. Sociologists describe a behavior called civil inattention, where people politely ignore each other in public spaces, giving strangers privacy in crowded places like subways or elevators. In these dense, diverse environments, small words like sorry can serve a practical purpose. Bumping into a stranger, holding a door a second too long, or brushing past someone on a busy sidewalk creates small moments of friction. A quick sorry can smooth things over without needing further conversation. It is difficult to prove that geography alone created this habit, but it is fair to say that living among strangers, in crowded cities, workplaces, and public transit, gives small, polite words a clear, practical role. When so many different people share the same spaces every day, it naturally changes the way conversations unfold. Is saying sorry really about politeness, or is something else going on underneath? Psychologists who study apology behavior point out that words like sorry can serve several different emotional functions. Sometimes it truly is politeness, a learned social habit meant to show respect. But sometimes it can be a way of avoiding discomfort. Saying sorry quickly can end an awkward moment before it grows into something bigger. Think about a crowded elevator. Someone accidentally steps on your foot. They say sorry instantly, almost before they even feel the bump. Is that genuine regret? Or is it simply a fast way to prevent a few seconds of silence or an accidental sense of tension? There is also a difference between polite sorry and peacekeeping sorry. A polite sorry softens a request or a minor inconvenience. A peacekeeping sorry avoids friction altogether, especially in workplaces or family settings, where standing firm might feel more costly than staying quiet. This raises a real question for both Canadians and outside observers. Is constant apologizing always a sign of kindness, or can it sometimes mask a deeper discomfort with confrontation itself? Many Canadians would likely say it depends entirely on the moment, the tone, and the relationship between the two people speaking. There is no single tidy answer. Politeness, habit, and quiet conflict avoidance often blend together in ways that are hard to separate, even for the person saying the word. So maybe the real question isn't why Canadians say sorry so often. Maybe it's what we're all really avoiding when we reach for that word ourselves. Have you ever heard someone criticize a coworker by saying, "That's an interesting approach"? In many parts of Canada, that phrase is not a compliment. It is a polite warning sign. Indirect language is a core part of English-Canadian communication. Instead of saying, "I disagree," many Canadians will say, "I see it a bit differently." This softens the message, but the intention is still clear to those familiar with the pattern. Self-deprecating humor plays a similar role. Making a joke about your own mistake before anyone else can is a common way to release tension. Confrontation, especially in public, is something many people actively try to avoid. But is Canadian sorry always kind? Not necessarily. Sometimes it is warm empathy. Sometimes it is pure reflex, said without any feeling behind it at all. And sometimes it carries a sharper edge, a way of saying, "You are in my way," or even, "That was not okay," wrapped in a polite shell. Online discussions about the word often describe it as a tool for easing tension, but many people admit that tone changes everything. The exact same word, said flatly or sharply, can shift from courtesy to quiet frustration in an instant. This pattern is not universal across the country. In Quebec, French-Canadian communication often leans more direct and expressive. Directness there is often seen as honesty, not rudeness, a very different rhythm from English-speaking Canada. These differences remind us that Canadian politeness is not one single script. What looks like universal reserve from the outside is actually a patchwork of styles, and sometimes hidden feeling working side by side. While this fear of appearing rude feels uniquely Canadian, how does it actually measure up when placed side by side with the rest of the English-speaking world? Is Canadian politeness really unique, or does it just look different from politeness elsewhere? Britain actually uses the word sorry very often too. Research on British speech has shown it is one of the most commonly used words in everyday English conversation, not just in Canada. British politeness often carries subtle social signals, layered with class and formality. Phrases like, "with all due respect," or "not to worry," can carry different meanings depending on tone and context. The United States often takes a different approach, but not necessarily an opposite one. Americans may simply reach for different words in similar situations. Where a Canadian might say sorry to smooth over a small bump, an American might say, "excuse me," or "no worries," achieving a similar social effect through a different phrase. Assertiveness is often valued in American professional culture, but that does not mean politeness is absent, it just shows up differently. Australia brings another style into the mix. Australian communication often leans on humor, irony, and playful teasing, sometimes called banter. Instead of softening a disagreement with an apology, Australians might soften it with a joke instead. So if sorry itself is not unique to Canada, why did the Canadian version become the one the world talks about? Part of the answer may lie not in the word itself, but in how visible and repeatable it became through comedy, media, and branding. Canada did not necessarily say sorry more than everyone else. It simply became known for saying it. Yet, even if other nations use similar verbal cushions, Canada is the only country that felt compelled to write this specific habit into its legal system. Imagine getting into a minor car accident. Your instinct is to say sorry, just to ease the tension. But what if that single word could later be used against you in court? This is not a hypothetical concern. Before certain laws existed, an apology after an accident or a medical error could potentially be used as evidence of fault in a civil case. This created an awkward tension between natural human instinct and legal caution. British Columbia was the first Canadian province to address this, passing apology legislation in 2006. Ontario followed in 2009 with its own Apology Act. Similar laws now exist in other provinces and territories across Canada. These laws state that an apology does not automatically count as an admission of fault or liability in most civil matters. This means, if someone says sorry after a car accident, a workplace incident, or a medical error, that statement alone cannot be treated as automatic proof of legal responsibility. Before these laws, lawyers sometimes advised clients to avoid apologizing, worried that even a simple expression of sympathy might carry legal risk. This meant some people stayed silent in moments where an honest apology could have eased tension or supported healing. These laws allowed people to express empathy without automatically accepting blame. A doctor could say sorry to a patient's family without it counting as a confession of malpractice. A driver could express concern after a small collision without it being treated as an admission of guilt. So yes, in a legal sense, Canada did give sorry special protection. Not because courts were overwhelmed by apologies, but because lawmakers recognized a real gap between everyday politeness and legal risk. Does a Newfoundlander say sorry the same way as someone in Vancouver? Not quite. Canada is often talked about as one culture, but regional differences run deep. In Atlantic Canada, especially Newfoundland, everyday speech tends to be warm, expressive, and rich with local expressions. A sorry there might come wrapped in extra friendliness, part of a broader style of talk that values connection and storytelling. In the prairies, communication can lean more plain and direct, shaped partly by farming communities where clear, practical talk mattered for daily work. A quick, sorry, there might be said briskly, almost in passing, without much emotional weight attached. In Quebec, as we've noted earlier, French-Canadian communication often favors directness over cushioned language. This does not mean politeness is absent. It simply takes a different shape, often expressed through different words and social customs rather than a reflexive, sorry. Indigenous communities across the country also bring their own distinct communication traditions, shaped by specific nations and local histories, rather than a single shared style. These traditions existed long before European settlement and continue to shape local ways of showing respect today. Generational differences matter too. Older Canadians, raised with more formal social expectations, may use sorry as an automatic courtesy in almost any interaction. Younger Canadians, especially in large multicultural cities, sometimes use it more selectively, aware of its many different meanings and sometimes even joking about it. So there is no single Canadian sorry. There are many versions, shaped by region, language, generation, and community. If the word itself changes so much from place to place, what does that tell us about the search for one simple explanation behind it? At what point does a joke about your culture become part of your culture? For Canadians, that shift happened right on television screens. Canadian comedy played a huge role in shaping this image. Shows like SCTV brought sharp, self-aware humor to national audiences, starting in the late 1970s. Later, the Red Green Show turned gentle, self-deprecating Canadian characters into a beloved staple of Canadian television. These shows did not mock politeness harshly. They celebrated it, often with warmth and affection. Tourism campaigns picked up on this same idea. Ads promoting Canada often highlighted friendliness, calmness, and welcoming nature as core selling points. Instead of avoiding the polite stereotype, these campaigns leaned into it, turning a joke into a marketing strength. International media noticed too. American and British television often portrayed Canadians as endlessly polite, sometimes exaggerating the trait for comedic effect. Rather than resisting this portrayal, many Canadians began embracing it. This became especially meaningful when Canadians compared themselves to their southern neighbors. In a world where American identity often emphasized boldness and directness, Canadian identity found strength in contrast. Politeness became a quiet form of national pride, a way of saying, "We do things differently here." What started as an unconscious social habit slowly became a conscious symbol. Comedians joked about it, tourism boards promoted it, and everyday Canadians started joking about themselves in the same way. The stereotype stopped being something imposed from outside. It became something Canadians chose to claim as their own. So, as we peel back the layers of media myth, legal quirks, and colonial history, what is the ultimate truth behind this national reflex? So, is the Canadian sorry really a sign of weakness? After everything we have uncovered, the answer is clearly no. This small word carries centuries of history. It holds traces of British order, French community life, Indigenous consensus building, and generations of immigrants seeking peaceful coexistence. It reflects a vast, sparsely populated land where cooperation was often necessary for survival. It even shaped how modern Canadian law treats language and responsibility. The Canadian sorry is not passive. It is not automatic weakness dressed up as manners. It is a tool, refined over generations, to reduce friction between people. It allows strangers to share crowded spaces without conflict. It allows coworkers to disagree without hostility. It allows communities built from many different backgrounds to function smoothly, day after day. Of course, this is not one single, uniform habit. English-speaking Canadians, French-speaking Quebecers, Indigenous communities, and newer immigrant generations all carry their own variations of this instinct. Some lean on directness, others on subtlety. But across these differences, a shared value remains: choosing harmony over ego, connection over confrontation. In a world where conversations often turn quickly into arguments, there is something worth noticing here. Leading with empathy, even in small daily moments, does not weaken a person. It strengthens communities. Perhaps that is the quiet lesson hidden inside a word so many people dismiss as a joke. Saying sorry, in its many Canadian forms, is not about admitting fault. It is about choosing kindness first, again and again, in the smallest moments of everyday life.